Hi, I'm Madison Pierce. I'm a corporate attorney in Boston, and I've spent the last 8 years building a practice that most people twice my age would envy. But Thanksgiving 2023, that's a day I'll never forget. That's the day my father announced he was selling our family business for $50 million, and I wouldn't see a penny of it. My siblings cheered like they'd just won the lottery. What they didn't know was that I was the one writing the check. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been invisible in your own family? Have you ever sat at a dinner table where everyone talks about your future like you're not even there? Because that's exactly what happened to me, and I'm willing to bet some of you know exactly how that feels. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you the perfect cover to do something extraordinary. Let me take you back to that Thanksgiving dinner. Picture this. The Pierce family mansion in Connecticut. The same dining room where 4 generations of my family had made their most important decisions. The mahogany table that my great-grandfather built with his own hands, set with my grandmother's china that only came out for special occasions. 23 people crammed around that table. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole extended Pierce clan. And then there's me, sitting in what had always been designated as the kids' corner, even though I'm 28 years old with a Harvard law degree and a 7-figure income. But in the Pierce family hierarchy, I'm still just Robert Pierce's daughter, the one who was supposed to marry well and look pretty at family photos. My father stood up at the head of the table, tapping his wine glass with that heavy silver knife that belonged to his grandfather. The room fell silent. Dad loves his dramatic moments, always has. He's the kind of man who announces what he's having for breakfast like it's breaking news. Family, he said, his chest puffed out like a peacock. I have an announcement that's going to change everything for the Pierces. I watched my brother Jake lean forward, practically salivating. Jake's 32, has an MBA from Harvard Business School that Dad never lets anyone forget about. But here's what Dad conveniently forgets to mention. Jake has run 3 companies into the ground. 3. But he's the golden child, the heir apparent, the one who is going to carry on the Pierce legacy. My sister Sarah was sitting there with her husband Marcus, both of them with those hungry looks that people get when they smell money. Sarah married into old Connecticut money, the kind of family where they name buildings after your great-great-grandfather. But even old money runs thin when you spend it like Sarah does. She goes through Marcus's family trust fund like it's monopoly money. After 42 years of building Pierce Industries from the ground up, Dad continued, I've made the decision to sell. You could have heard a pin drop. Then Jake spoke up, and I swear his voice cracked like he was 13 again. Sell? Dad, what do you mean sell? Pierce Industries is our legacy. It's our future. Dad held up his hand like he was stopping traffic. Son, I mean exactly what I said. I've been in negotiations for the past 6 months, and I'm proud to announce that Everest Holdings has made us an offer we simply cannot refuse. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. How much, Daddy? $50 million. The room erupted. Cousins started whooping. Aunts started crying. Uncles started calculating their shares out loud. It was like someone had just announced that we'd all won the lottery. But then Dad held up his hand again. And this time his expression was different. Colder. More calculated. Now, I want to be clear about something, he said, and his eyes found mine across the table. This sale represents the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter for some of us. Jake, you'll be receiving 30% of the proceeds. Sarah, you'll receive 30% as well. I did the math instantly. That's $15 million each. Not bad for doing absolutely nothing to earn it. The remaining 40% will be divided among various family members and charitable contributions, Dad continued. Everyone who has contributed to the success of Pierce Industries will be rewarded accordingly. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. In corporate law, you learn to never show your hand until you're ready to play it. What about Madison? It was my cousin Jenny who asked. Bless her heart. Jenny's always been the one family member who remembered I existed. Dad's smile was thin, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. Madison has chosen to pursue her own path. She's made it very clear that she's not interested in the family business. The lies came so smoothly, you'd think he'd been practicing them. The truth was, I'd been trying to get involved in Pierce Industries since I was 16 years old. I'd written business plans, conducted market analyses, identified new revenue streams, all of which Dad had dismissed with a wave of his hand and some comment about how business isn't for girls. Jake actually had the audacity to raise his wine glass. Finally, Dad's making the smart play. Can you imagine if Madison had gotten involved? She would have run the company into the ground within a year. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. Girls just don't have the killer instinct for business. It's biology, really. Madison's much better suited for her little law practice. Little law practice. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Madison should actually be grateful, Jake continued, really warming to his theme now. Dad's saving her from the burden of responsibility. Running a $50 million company isn't like writing contracts and filing paperwork. It takes real vision, real leadership. The entire table was nodding along, like Jake had just delivered the Gettysburg Address instead of the most condescending speech I'd ever heard in my life. But here's what they didn't know, what none of them knew. I'd been listening to conversations like this my entire life. And about 2 years ago, I decided to do something about it. So, Madison, Dad said, turning to me with that patronizing smile that I'd grown to hate, I hope you understand that this is actually the best thing for everyone. You're free to focus on your legal career without the distraction of family business obligations. I looked around the table at all these people, my own blood, celebrating my exclusion like it was a victory. I thought about all the times I'd tried to contribute, all the ideas I'd pitched that had been shot down, all the late nights I'd spent working on proposals that never even got read. And then I smiled. Not the fake smile I'd been wearing all evening, but a real one. The kind of smile you get when you know something nobody else knows. That's very thoughtful of you, Dad, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'm curious, though, who exactly is this Everest Holdings? I mean, $50 million is a substantial investment. They must be a pretty sophisticated operation. Dad's chest puffed out even more. Oh, they're top tier, Madison. Absolute top tier. The kind of private equity firm that only deals with premier assets. They saw the potential in Pierce Industries immediately. That's fascinating, I said, taking a sip of wine. What's the timeline looking like for the sale? We're signing the final papers next week, Dad said. Everything's been negotiated, all the due diligence is complete. It's just a matter of signing on the dotted line and transferring the money. I nodded thoughtfully. And you've met with the principals at Everest Holdings? I mean, $50 million. That's the kind of transaction where you want to look the decision makers in the eye. Make sure you're dealing with serious people. Jake laughed, the kind of laugh that's designed to make you feel stupid. Madison, this isn't some small-town real estate deal. Companies like Everest Holdings don't operate the way your little legal clients do. They have layers of management, sophisticated structures. Dad's been dealing with their acquisition team. Of course, I said. I'm just curious about their other investments. I mean, if they're paying $50 million for Pierce Industries, they must have a pretty impressive portfolio. Have you looked into their track record? Dad waved his hand dismissively. Madison, sweetheart, this is exactly why business isn't for you. You're overthinking a simple transaction. Everest Holdings came to us with a clean offer, verified funds, and a timeline that works for everyone. That's all that matters. I could feel my grandmother's ring on my finger, the only piece of family jewelry that had ever been given to me, and only because she'd specifically written it into her will. I twisted it slowly, a habit I developed when I needed to stay calm. You're absolutely right, Dad, I said. I'm sure you've done all the necessary research. But I wasn't done. I couldn't be done. Because sitting there listening to my own family celebrate my exclusion while simultaneously condescending to me about business, something snapped. Or maybe it didn't snap. Maybe it crystallized. Maybe it became diamond hard and laser focused. I do have one more question, though, I said, and something in my tone made the conversation around the table die down. Dad, you said Everest Holdings is paying $50 million. Is that all cash? Or is there a financing component? Dad's eyebrows furrowed. It's a cash transaction, Madison. Why would that matter? Oh, it doesn't matter to me personally, why? I said, still smiling that same calm smile. I'm just impressed. $50 million in liquid assets. Now, that's serious money. They must have some pretty substantial backing. Sarah was looking at me like I'd started speaking Mandarin. Madison, why are you asking so many questions? You said yourself you're not interested in the family business. I never said I wasn't interested, Sarah, I replied, my voice still perfectly level. I said I'd chosen to pursue my own path. Those are two very different things. Jake was getting that look he gets when he thinks someone's trying to make him look stupid, which isn't hard to do, honestly. Madison, what's your point here? Are you questioning Dad's business judgment? Because if you are, I'm not questioning anything, I interrupted. I'm just curious about Everest Holdings. In my line of work, you learn to research the companies you're dealing with. It's just professional habit. The thing is, I wasn't lying. It is professional habit. When you're a corporate attorney, especially one who specializes in mergers and acquisitions, you learn to dig deep into every company, every transaction, every detail that doesn't quite add up. And here's what my family didn't know about my little law practice. It wasn't little, not even close. Over the past 5 years, I'd built one of the most successful boutique corporate law firms in Boston. We specialized in high-stakes transactions, the kind where a single mistake could cost millions. My client list read like a who's who of New England's business elite, and my success rate was something that bigger firms could only dream about. But more importantly, 2 years ago, I'd started making some investments of my own. Well, I'm sure you'll do your research after the fact, Dad said, clearly wanting to end this line of questioning. But the decision's already been made. We're moving forward with Everest Holdings. I nodded and took another sip of wine. Around the table, the conversation had shifted back to celebration mode. People were talking about what they were going to do with their shares of the $50 million. Jake was talking about finally launching that tech startup he'd been promising for 3 years. Sarah was talking about buying a house in Martha's Vineyard. Nobody was talking about what Pierce Industries actually was, or what it meant to our family legacy, or what my great-grandfather would have thought about selling the company he'd built with his bare hands during the Great Depression. But I was thinking about all of those things. I was thinking about the 10-year-old girl who used to sit in my grandfather's office, listening to him explain how business worked, how you treated people fairly but you never let them take advantage of you, how success was something you earned through hard work and smart decisions. I was thinking about the 16-year-old who had written a comprehensive business plan to save Pierce Industries from bankruptcy, a plan that had actually worked, even though Dad had taken all the credit for implementing it. I was thinking about the 26-year-old who had approached Dad about joining the board, only to be told that the company wasn't ready for that kind of change. And I was thinking about something else, something that none of them knew, something that was going to change everything. As the evening wound down and people started saying their goodbyes, I found myself standing alone in my grandfather's old study. It was the one room in the house that Dad had left, exactly as it was when Grandpa died 10 years ago. His books were still on the shelves, his desk was still covered with the same leather blotter, and there, in the corner, was the safe where he used to keep his most important documents. I ran my fingers along the spines of his business books, many of which I'd read when I was barely tall enough to reach them. Grandpa had never treated me like I was too young or too female to understand business. He'd explained concepts to me like I was a peer, challenged me to think critically about problems, encouraged me to ask the hard questions. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong somewhere because of who you are, he'd told me once. You belong wherever your competence and your character take you. I thought about that conversation a lot over the next few days, especially as I watched my family get more and more excited about their upcoming windfall. Jake had already started shopping for office space for his new startup. Sarah had called a realtor about that Martha's Vineyard house. Dad was talking about early retirement and maybe writing a book about his business philosophy. None of them asked me how I was feeling about being cut out of the biggest financial transaction in our family's history. None of them seemed to consider that I might have opinions about selling the company that our great-grandfather had literally built with his own hands. But that was fine, because while they were busy spending money they hadn't received yet, I was busy preparing for the most important business meeting of my career. You see, there was something about Everest Holdings that my father didn't know, something that Jake and Sarah didn't know, something that was going to make the next week very, very interesting. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let me tell you about a conversation I'd had with my grandfather the summer before he died, when I was 18 and about to start college. We were sitting in his study, the same study where I'd stood after that Thanksgiving dinner, and he was telling me about the early days of Pierce Industries. Madison, he'd said, there's something I want you to understand about this business. It's not just a company. It's not just a way to make money. It's a legacy. It's the accumulation of 4 generations of Pierce family values, work ethic, and vision. He'd pulled out an old photograph from his desk drawer, a black and white picture of him and his father standing in front of the original Pierce Industries building. It was tiny compared to what the company had become, just a single-story building with hand-painted signs in the windows. Your great-grandfather started this company with $200 and a handshake deal to provide machine parts to the local textile mills, Grandpa had continued. He worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, for 3 years before he could afford to hire his first employee. And you know what he told me when I was about your age? I'd shaken my head. He said, son, this company will outlive both of us, but only if each generation cares more about the next generation than they do about themselves. That's the responsibility that comes with being a Pierce, Madison. It's not about the money. It's about stewardship. At the time, I'd nodded and said all the right things, but I'm not sure I really understood what he meant. I was 18, heading off to Harvard, dreaming about law school and my own career. The family business seemed like something that would always just be there. Now, 10 years later, standing in that same study after watching my father sell that legacy for $50 million without even consulting me, I finally understood what my grandfather had been trying to tell me. Pierce Industries wasn't just a company. It was a trust. And that trust was about to be broken. Unless, of course, someone did something about it. The next morning, I drove back to Boston with a very specific plan forming in my mind. It was a plan that had actually been 2 years in the making, though I hadn't fully realized it at the time. You see, 2 years ago, right around the time that Dad had rejected my proposal to join the Pierce Industries board, I'd made a decision. I'd decided that if I couldn't be part of the family business as Robert Pierce's daughter, maybe I could be part of it in some other capacity. And that's when I'd started building Everest Holdings. The drive back to Boston that Sunday morning gave me 3 hours to think. And by the time I pulled into my parking garage in Back Bay, I knew exactly what I had to do. The next week was going to require precision, timing, and nerves of steel. Fortunately, those are 3 things that corporate law teaches you in spades. My assistant Emma was already at the office when I arrived Monday morning, which didn't surprise me. Emma Chen is the kind of person who treats Sunday like a suggestion rather than a commandment, and she's probably the smartest paralegal I've ever worked with. More importantly, she's one of the few people who knows about Everest Holdings. How was Thanksgiving with the family? She asked, not looking up from her computer screen where she was reviewing contracts. Illuminating, I said, dropping into the chair across from her desk. Emma, I need you to pull the Everest Holdings files, all of them. Now she looked up. Madison, please tell me you're not about to do something that's going to give me a heart attack. I smiled. The same smile I'd been wearing since Saturday night. I'm about to do something that's going to make both of us very rich. Here's what Emma knew that my family didn't. 2 years ago, when my father had rejected my proposal to join the Pierce Industries board for the 3rd and final time, I hadn't just walked away defeated. I'd walked away determined. I'd spent the next 6 months researching private equity structures, studying acquisition strategies, and, most importantly, figuring out how to build a legitimate investment company from scratch. I'd used every contact I'd made during my years in corporate law, called in every favor, and leveraged every relationship I'd built in Boston's tight-knit business community. The initial funding had come from 3 sources. First, there was the tech startup I'd helped take public 2 years earlier, a little artificial intelligence company that had paid me partially in equity instead of cash. When they went public, my shares were worth $15 million. I'd sold them the day after the lockup period ended. Second, there was my investment portfolio. While my family had been assuming I was just playing around with my little law practice, I'd been quietly building one of the most successful angel investment portfolios in New England. Biotech companies, fintech startups, renewable energy projects. I had a talent for spotting winners early. That portfolio was worth about $20 million. Third, and this was the part that had required the most careful planning, there was the bank loan. Not just any bank loan, a secured loan from 3 different Boston banks, using my personal assets, my law practice, and my investment portfolio as collateral. $15 million in liquidity available on 48 hours notice. Total available capital, $50 million exactly. Emma, I need you to call David Kim at Morrison, Stewart and Associates. I said, tell him we need to accelerate the Pierce Industries acquisition timeline. Emma's eyes widened. Madison, are you telling me that you're actually... I'm telling you that Everest Holdings is about to make the biggest acquisition in our company's history, I said. And I need everything to be absolutely perfect. David Kim had been my mentor when I was a junior associate at one of Boston's white shoe law firms. He was the lawyer who taught me that the most important skill in corporate law isn't knowing the rules. It's knowing how to use the rules to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. When I'd started building Everest Holdings, David was the first person I'd called. Madison Pierce Chen, he said when he answered the phone. I'd hyphenated my name when I married my husband Kevin 2 years ago, partly for personal reasons and partly because it provided perfect cover for what I was building. Please tell me you're calling to tell me this crazy plan of yours is finally ready to execute. David, we're signing papers next week. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then what sounded suspiciously like champagne being opened. Madison, you brilliant, terrifying woman. How does it feel to be about to buy your own family's company? Ask me again after I've seen the look on my father's face. The next few days were a blur of legal documents, financial transfers, and very careful communication with Pierce Industries investment bankers. The beautiful thing about the structure we'd built was that everything was completely legitimate. Everest Holdings was a real company with real assets, making a real offer for a real acquisition. The only thing my father didn't know was who owned Everest Holdings. Wednesday morning, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Ms. Chen? The voice belonged to Richard Morrison, the investment banker handling the Pierce Industries sale. This is Richard Morrison from Goldman Sachs. I'm calling to confirm that Everest Holdings is prepared to proceed with the acquisition as scheduled. Absolutely, Mr. Morrison, I said. All funding is in place. All documents are prepared. We're ready to close on Friday. Excellent. And just to confirm, you'll be representing Everest Holdings at the closing? I paused for just a moment, savoring what was about to happen. Actually, Mr. Morrison, there's been a change. The principals of Everest Holdings have decided to attend the closing personally. The principals? I was under the impression that Everest Holdings preferred to maintain a low profile. We do, I said. But this particular acquisition is special. It requires a personal touch. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, typical November weather in Boston. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, choosing my outfit with the care of a general selecting weapons for battle. Black Saint Laurent suit, tailored to perfection. Hermes briefcase, a gift to myself when I made my first million. Hair pulled back in a severe chignon that Kevin says makes me look like I could run a Fortune 500 company. Which, as of today, I could. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Morrison, Stewart and Associates' downtown office. I arrived at 9:30, partly because I wanted to be early and partly because I wanted to watch my family arrive. They came in like a parade. Dad in his best Navy suit, the one he wore to important occasions. Jake in a gray Tom Ford that probably cost more than most people's cars. Sarah in head-to-toe Chanel because subtlety has never been her strong suit. They were all smiling, all excited, all ready to collect their checks and celebrate the end of the Pierce Industries era. I waited until they were all settled in the conference room before I made my entrance. Good morning, everyone, I said, walking into the room with Emma behind me, both of us carrying briefcases full of documents. The confusion on their faces was immediate and complete. Madison? Dad looked genuinely puzzled. Sweetheart, what are you doing here? This is a business meeting. I know exactly what kind of meeting this is, Dad, I said, taking a seat at the conference table directly across from him. I'm here representing my client. Jake laughed, the kind of nervous laugh that people make when they don't understand what's happening. Madison, this isn't some small business contract dispute. This is a $50 million acquisition. You're way out of your league here. Richard Morrison cleared his throat. Actually, Mr. Pierce, Ms. Chen is here representing the acquiring entity. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop onto the mahogany conference table. I'm sorry, Sarah said, her voice pitched higher than usual. Did you say Madison is representing the buyers? That's correct, Morrison replied. Ms. Chen has been our primary legal contact throughout this transaction. Dad was staring at me like I just announced I was from Mars. Madison, I don't understand. You're representing Everest Holdings? I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. Dad, before we proceed with the signing, there's something I need to tell you. The room was so quiet, I could hear the heating system cycling on. I don't just represent Everest Holdings, I said, my voice clear and steady. I am Everest Holdings. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Jake was the first to find his voice. That's impossible, Madison, that's completely impossible. Lee, you don't have $50 million. I pulled out the bank statements, the asset verification documents, the proof of funds letters. I spread them across the table like I was dealing cards. $15 million from the sale of AI startup equity, $20 million from my angel investment portfolio, $15 million in secured bank loans. Total liquid assets available, $50 million. Sarah was shaking her head like she could make reality go away through the sheer force of will. No, this is some kind of mistake. Madison, you're a lawyer. You have a small practice. You can't possibly— Sarah, I interrupted. My small practice has averaged $8 million in revenue over the past 3 years. My investment portfolio has returned an average of 43% annually. And my AI startup investment alone was worth more than Jake has made in his entire career. The color drained from Jake's face. You sold Nexus AI? You were an investor in Nexus AI? I wasn't just an investor, Jake. I was the legal counsel who structured their initial funding round. Their Series A, their Series B, and their IPO. They gave me equity instead of cash because they were bootstrap startups who couldn't afford my rates. When they went public, I was the third largest shareholder. Dad was looking at the documents on the table like they were written in a foreign language. Madison, I don't understand. If you had this kind of money, if you had this kind of success, why didn't you tell us? The question was so absurd, so completely tone-deaf that I actually laughed. Tell you? Dad, I tried to tell you. I tried to tell you for years. Every time I brought you a business proposal, you dismissed it. Every time I offered to help with Pierce Industries, you told me business wasn't for girls. Every time I tried to demonstrate my competence, you found a way to diminish it. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out something else, a leather portfolio that Dad would recognize. Do you remember this, Dad? I held up the portfolio. This is the business plan I wrote when I was 16. The plan that saved Pierce Industries from bankruptcy. The plan that you implemented almost word for word, then took full credit for. Dad's face went pale. Madison, that was different. You were just a child. You didn't understand. I understood perfectly, and I said, I understood that you needed to divest the manufacturing division, focus on the high-margin service contracts, and restructure your debt. I understood that you were 3 months away from insolvency. And I understood that my ideas were good enough to save the company, just not good enough to earn me a seat at the table. Jake was staring at the documents like they might spontaneously combust. This doesn't make sense. Even if you have the money, even if you've been successful, why would you want to buy Pierce Industries? Why would you want to buy it from us? It was a good question. The honest answer was complicated, layered with years of hurt and anger and disappointment. But there was a simpler answer too. Because I love this company, Jake. I love what it represents, what it could become. Pierce Industries has been underperforming for years because it's been managed by people who inherited their positions instead of earning them. It has incredible potential that's never been realized because the leadership has been more concerned with maintaining the status quo than with innovation and growth. I pulled out another set of documents. These were projections, market analyses, strategic plans. Under my leadership, Pierce Industries will triple in value within 5 years. We're going to expand into 3 new markets, implement cutting-edge technology solutions, and establish ourselves as the premier service provider in our industry. Sarah was shaking her head again. Madison, you can't just buy our family's company. That's not how this works. That's not how families work. Sarah, I said, you literally cheered when Dad announced that I would be getting nothing from this sale. You celebrated my exclusion. You told a room full of people that I didn't have the competence to be involved in business decisions. So please don't lecture me about how families work. The truth was settling over them like fog rolling in from the harbor. Richard Morrison was shuffling through his papers, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama, but also clearly ready to proceed with the transaction. Mr. Pierce, Morrison said, if you'd like to take some time to discuss this with your family. No, Dad said, his voice hollow. No, we're here to complete a transaction. If Madison has the funds, if everything is legitimate. He looked at me across the table, and for the first time in years, I saw something in his eyes that might have been respect. Or maybe it was just shock. Madison, he said quietly, is this your way of getting revenge? I considered the question carefully. Revenge would have been buying Pierce Industries and running it into the ground. Revenge would have been firing everyone and selling off the assets. Revenge would have been destroying something just because I could. No, Dad, I said finally. This is my way of coming home. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I'd been carrying since Thanksgiving. The small velvet box that contained my grandfather's watch. Not the Rolex that Dad had given to Jake, but the original Hamilton Railroad watch that great-grandfather had carried when he started the company. Grandpa gave me this before he died, I said, placing the watch on the table. He told me it had been in our family since 1923, when great-grandfather started Pierce Industries. He said it should go to whoever would best protect the family legacy. I looked around the table at my father, my brother, my sister. 3 people who had been ready to sell our family's legacy to strangers without a second thought. I'm not buying Pierce Industries to hurt anyone, I continued. I'm buying it because someone needs to protect what great-grandfather built. Someone needs to ensure that 4 generations of Pierce family values and vision don't disappear into some private equity portfolio. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question I'd been expecting. What happens to us? What happens to our positions in the company? I had been preparing for this question for 2 years. Jake, your position as Vice President of Business Development will remain available, assuming you want it. Same salary, same responsibilities. Sarah, the company has never employed you, so nothing changes there. Dad, I paused, looking at my father. Dad, I'd like you to stay on as Chairman Emeritus. Consulting role, flexible schedule, good benefits. You built something remarkable here, and I want you to be part of its next chapter. The room was quiet, except for the sound of Richard Morrison's pen scratching across legal documents. There is one condition, I added. Moving forward, Pierce Industries will be a meritocracy. Positions will be earned based on competence and results, not on gender or family status. Everyone will be held to the same standards, everyone will be expected to contribute, and everyone will be rewarded based on their actual performance. Dad nodded slowly. That's fair. And one more thing, I said, picking up great-grandfather's watch. This watch has been with Pierce Industries since the beginning. It's going back where it belongs. I fastened the watch around my wrist, feeling the weight of 4 generations of Pierce family history. Richard Morrison cleared his throat. If everyone is ready, we can proceed with the signing. The actual transaction took about 30 minutes. Papers were signed, documents were notarized, funds were transferred. By 11:30 a.m. on that gray November morning, I was the sole owner of Pierce Industries. When it was over, when the final document had been signed and the wire transfers had been confirmed, my family sat in stunned silence. Madison, Dad said finally, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. Dad, you don't... Yes, I do. His voice was firm. I spent your entire life underestimating you, dismissing your ideas, excluding you from decisions that affected your future. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was really protecting my own assumptions about who you were and what you were capable of. He stood up and walked around the table, extending his hand to me. Congratulations, Madison. Pierce Industries couldn't be in better hands. As I shook my father's hand, I thought about the 10-year-old girl who used to sit in my grandfather's office, dreaming about someday being part of the family business. I thought about the 16-year-old who had written a plan to save the company, then watched someone else take credit for it. I thought about the 26-year-old who had been told she didn't belong in a boardroom. And I thought about great-grandfather's watch, ticking steadily on my wrist, marking time for a new chapter in the Pierce Industries story. "Thank you, Dad," I said. "I won't let you down." Because the truth was, this had never been about revenge. It had never been about proving anyone wrong or getting back at people who had hurt me. It had always been about coming home.